My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. These lyrics, penned by the English hymnist and Baptist minister Edward Mote in 1834, capture a rugged spirituality born at the crossroads of industrial advancement and civil upheaval. 1834, this is the year when new inventions are being patented every week while anti-abolitionist riots are breaking out all over New York City. 1834, the year that slavery is abolished in the British Empire, while the Ursuline convent in Massachusetts goes up in flames, burned to the ground by an anti-Catholic extremist group in the name of Jesus. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, Mote writes, and I imagine Mote standing at the intersection of prophetic hope and indescribable despair with a pen in one hand and paper in the other, trying to hold on to a fragile faith in an ever-changing world. These crossroads travel daily in our trespassed land and abroad. With great advancement came great anguish. With a promising newness at every horizon came the battle with antebellum attachment to a dangerous yesteryear. Oh, my friends, this was not a time unlike our own, and I imagine that one could easily find themselves on the wrong side of history. I imagine that one could easily find themselves being sucked into the quicksand of foolishness that even 2 centuries ago was evident to those who dared to unveil the perils of the myth of white supremacy. This myth, stemming from the roots of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism, is carved out by 1st century Roman historian Tacitus. Yes, beloved, we are taking it all the way back to the 1st century, to the year 98 Common Era, when in his publication, Germania, Tacitus makes a case that perhaps a certain subpopulation of Germany is more ethnically pure and thus morally and physiologically superior, laying the foolish foundations of ethnic supremacy that would spread like a virus throughout the globe. This virus, this pandemic, is further explored in the 2015 publication Stand Your Ground by Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, in which she explicates Tacitus' ferocious and foolish declaration of superiority, linking it to the unfortunate events of the Holocaust and carrying the idea of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism across the Atlantic. Now, some of you are sitting at home, bored with this history lesson. You are wondering how you got sucked back into high school history, but the unfortunate reality of how much our educational system has failed us is that we sit around foolishly baffled at how a history we hardly know keeps repeating itself. So I come to you today not to bring peace, but a sword. A weapon of knowledge that will prick us out of the ignorance that keeps us bound and ritualizing vain sorrow during calamitous times like these. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas reminds us that the early interlopers in this land carried their Anglo-Saxon heritage on their backs across the Atlantic Ocean with a self-righteous pride. Believing that they were the true and chosen heirs to a divine Anglo-Saxon mission, Douglas says, they were determined not to betray their Anglo-Saxon roots as they thought the English had done. And so here's the Cliff Notes version. My friends, Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism became Anglo-Saxon chauvinism, became the manifest destiny, became the trail of tears, became indentured servitude and chattel slavery, became Jim Crow laws and redlining and voter suppression and gentrification and militarized police forces, a recreating and repackaging of an unjust system. And now, here we are, finding ourselves here today, once again, performing shock and performing sadness, ritualizing our tears and lighting our candles and patting ourselves on the back for protesting, wondering why we keep having to call out injustice, wondering why we keep having to sit through sermons about Black Lives Mattering, wondering why we keep having to call out the bad apples, and this is where we meet Jesus. This is where we meet Jesus, at the apple tree, perhaps. Jesus knew a little something about bad apples. In fact, Jesus knew about something much deeper than the apple, something that many of us don't want to deal with, something beneath the surface, deep in the soil that cannot be understood when we're merely swiping at the branches. Jesus meets us today, giving us the answer right here in our text. It's an easy answer. In fact, it's so easy that it's hard, because we gloss over it thinking that we, this diverse conglomerate of people who call themselves Christians, know what Jesus is talking about. Perhaps one of our greatest sins has been our unwillingness to go to the ground with Jesus, our unwillingness to dig at the roots with Jesus in order to understand what he is naming in this moment. We meet Jesus today towards the end of his infamous Sermon on the Mount. In this gospel according to Matthew, the author pulls together several teachings and sayings of Jesus throughout the timeline of his ministry to create one concise lecture, a sort of Cliff Notes version, if you will. He creates this Cliff Notes version of Jesus's teachings to be given to a young, energetic, first-generation community of Christ followers in turmoil. What began as a lesson to a few disciples about blessing the meek and the poor becomes a powerful perlocutionary act to a growing crowd who begged to understand the difference between the sincere and the phony, who desired to know what truth was and what it wasn't, especially in their corrupt society where their own religious and political leaders have proven to be disingenuous upholders of a hazardous status quo. Yes, y'all know what I'm talking about. Disingenuous leaders like governors who have been co-opted by big banks who are stuffing their pockets so that they will stay quiet about economic inequities. You know the leaders, pastors more concerned with their personal wealth than the spiritual and economic wellness of their community. This is what Jesus begins to spell out to the crowd. He says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Who were these false prophets that Jesus spoke of? Who were these disingenuous leaders that Jesus was calling out? Some scholars suggest that Jesus is referring to the Essenes, a somewhat rogue and ascetic group of Jews who had their own views about how people should live their lives. Others suggest that Matthew, through Jesus' words, is foretelling the false prophets that are to come once Jesus is gone. Regardless of these scholarly interpretations, it's safe to say that Jesus wasn't too interested in giving us a detailed description of the false prophet, but rather pointing his audience to the signs so that they can discern it for themselves. Now, discernment is tricky. Having been called a false prophet many times in my life, I can attest to the fact that discernment is dangerous. Leaving Christians to their own devices has been a fatal, dangerous decision over the millennia. And here's the thing. No one wants to think that they are the false prophet. No one wants to think that they are the one who is being disingenuous. It's always someone else on the other side of the bipartisan line, right? It's always someone else at the other end of the moral political spectrum. It's always something outside of us. But the interesting thing is that Jesus doesn't linger on the falseness of the prophet. You see, we can get caught up in what's true or false, but Jesus takes us to the fruit. He takes us to the fruit that is brought forth. And more importantly, Jesus leads us to the foolish foundations from whence the fruit comes. Some might call the Roman historian Tacitus one of the original false prophets of the Common Era, co-opting religious thought to make a case for supremacy. He was not merely a bad apple, but he sowed the seed of what would become a rotten and diseased tree whose roots stretch like tentacles across various lands and oceans. A diseased tree, like the southern trees in Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, a diseased tree that is the foolish foundation upon which this country has been built, upon which we stand right now as the sand quickens all around us with every disturbing cry. Black lives matter. Stop killing us. Thus, Tacitus isn't alone in his false prophesying. For the same tree that existed centuries ago has continued to produce bad fruit right in front of our very eyes. What does the produce of a diseased tree look like, you ask? It looks like religious leaders who say they stand with the marginalized and persecuted folks, but refuse to name the sin of white supremacy and racism in their editorial. It looks like pastors and bishops who say they stand on the side of justice, but who still want to be able to kick it with politicians in the back rooms of the secular synagogues. It looks like mayors who say they are for the people when you elect them, but you have to pull teeth to get them to condemn the unnecessary and unconscionable behavior of militarized police states. What does the produce of a diseased tree look like? It looks like a generic Christianity that wants to be tolerated, not revolutionary. A generic Christianity that cares more about not ticking off high-paying members than speaking truth to power. It looks like institutions that are only just now speaking up about certain lives mattering because they care about your dollars. Hello, rainbow flags and rainbow tennis shoes everywhere for Pride Month. It looks like being not specific about what you really think or believe about the LGBT community so that you can still have a seat at the table. It looks like saying Black Lives Matter until a young trans woman is brutally attacked on the streets of Minneapolis by people who are so-called protesters, and you say nothing about it. What does the produce like not wanting to name the devils who are roaming around 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for who and what they are, because you care more about your wealth than the health of your neighbor. This is the folly that Jesus is coming against. These are the foolish foundations that Jesus is calling for his followers to dismantle, lest they make their homes on the sinking sand of ongoing calamity and religious and political abuse and deadly terrorism at the hands of those who have been called to protect and serve. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is foolishness and fascism and fake news and facetious journalism and fickle solidarity. Jesus calls us to a solid rock of truth, which means disrupting the status quo and abolishing the foundations of oppression upon which this society was built. It means taking a knee at the 50-yard line and still not having a job. It means risking being tear gassed for the sake of unearthing the disease tree of police-sanctioned violence. It means calling for the abolishment of law enforcement and prison systems as they are and as they would be. This is the solid rock that we are called to. From sinking sand to sensibility, from folly to wisdom. In this crisis moment, we have an opportunity to cross the threshold from the corrupt ways of yesteryear to a new vision for God's world. A vision that will require us to not just cut down the bad apples or swipe at the dead branches like we're used to doing, but a vision that will require us to go to the ground like Jesus did, digging up the roots of the sycamores and digging up the roots of the cypress and digging up the roots of the poplar and the pine and the oak, so that we may lay a new foundation. Jesus calls us to a new foundation, a reparative foundation, and that foundation is not going to be predicated on patriarchal hierarchy. That foundation won't be predicated on respectability politics and pointless pacification. It will be built by defunding brutal institutions in order to create better health services. It will be built by dethroning dictators who promote murder and harm of citizens. It will be built by disrupting the status quo over and over again with righteous indignation until all are set free from the chains of capitalism and greed. This is the call of the Christ follower. This is the work of the righteous who shall see God. Matthew, unlike the other gospel writers, didn't focus on Jesus' healing ministry. He was much more concerned with the teaching, something that his first century Christ followers could grab onto, a solid rock upon which they could stand. By the time of his writings and compilation, the second temple in Jerusalem had been looted and destroyed. There was a great rebellion in the land, and a people under the thumb of a very familiar tyrannical empire had enough. Thus, Matthew isn't concerned about miracles, signs, and wonders. Matthew wants to know who you're going to be when the going gets tough. It's about how you're going to show up in the face of discrimination and harassment. It was about what you were going to say that could shake the foolish foundations of a cancerous culture, not for the sake of clout or political fame, for money or access to certain exclusive spaces, but for the sake of life. We are doing this for for the sake of life, not for the front page article in the Observer or a photo opportunity. We are writing and we are marching and we are funding justice organizations and we are feeding folks for the sake of life. That is the miracle today. That is the sign. That is the wonder. And so it is that Matthew leads us to this moment of reckoning with Jesus and with each other so that we may begin again from the ground up with our hearts and our minds fixed on laying a new foundation. May it be so today and tomorrow and in the coming weeks and months. Amen.